Bonjour. And my French vocabulary does kind of stop there, so I'll continue in English. Thank you, Jean, for this, for the opportunity to participate on this very distinguished panel. And I thank the organizers for allowing the Abrahamic Forum from the Muslim perspective to be represented here at the ICCJ conference. So that's an honor for the forum and for me on a personal level. I'm not going to be able to be representative of all the views expressed by Muslims on the issue of blasphemy, as it is a subject of diverse opinion and great debate across the Muslim world today, as you heard in Professor Avon's lecture. And the fact that we only have a short space of time here today limits me on what I can say on the topic. There are a number of angles from which the topic of Islam and blasphemy can be approached. And Liliane asked me to say something about what the Quran has to say on the matter. Later in the discussion, I will hopefully get the opportunity to discuss more contemporary issues relating to the subject. So, being asked to talk on the Quran, I'll begin with this. And I'll just briefly mention that, yes, it is an intra-Muslim debate, as Professor Avon mentioned. However, there is also an element of the debate regarding Islam and the West, which also features in this. And to some extent, the intra-Muslim debate is also seen as an influence. For example, for those people who have been accused of some kind of blasphemy, some Muslims see this as Western influence of secularization and irreligiosity. So it's very difficult to take the West out of any kind of discussion on the topic, even if it is intra-Muslim. So, Liliane asked me to say something about what does Islamic law and the Quran say on the topic. It's a large subject. I'll try to be brief and also precise. The Quran does not actually use a word that exactly means blasphemy. There are Quranic verses which talk about insulting God and His messengers, such as, indeed, those who hurt or abuse, say evil things about, depending how you translate the word iza. So those who insult God and His messenger, God has cursed them in this world and the hereafter and prepared for them a degrading punishment. That's Surah 33, verse 57. So the word used here is abuse. It doesn't mean blasphemy. It could be abuse against anybody. But the construction is abuse against God and His messenger. Now, this may indicate that the sin of saying offensive statements about God and His messenger fall into the category of rights of God. Islamic law distinguishes between transgressions against the right of God and those against the rights of man. The latter punishable by law, and the former to be left to God's punishment or grace. Although there can be a combination of the two, and I will return to this, time permitting. Mocking the Prophet is not only forbidden, but cursing or mocking any Prophet makes one an unbeliever, a non-Muslim in Islam. In fact, the Quran prohibits the mocking of those who do not worship God. Surah 6, verse 108. So those who insult other religions, therefore, only disrespect the teachings of their own religion, if they are Muslims, according to the Quranic verse. Some Sunni jurists, legal scholars, said that abusing and swearing at the first two caliphs in Islam, Abu Bakr and Umar, makes one an apostate. This aimed at the more extreme brand of Shiism. But the theologians say that it does not take one outside the fold of Islam. Now, in the Quran, no punishment has been prescribed for insulting God and the messengers. This has led some Muslims in modern times to say that the application of blasphemy laws in Muslim lands is as a result of corrupting Western influence, where blasphemy has been punished. Now, the irony here is that it's the West that is sometimes the most critical of blasphemy laws in Muslim countries. But here, Western influence has not led to a liberalizing of attitudes, but actually a stringency of the law and limiting of free speech, using free speech sarcastically here. This, however, is actually not the case, because Islamic law has in its history prescribed punishments for insulting the religion. I'm just trying to give you a taste of the varying opinions that are expressed today. We can also find a word that has a resemblance to the word blasphemy. And it's this word in Arabic, tajdif, or form 2, from the root jadafa. It's not used in the Quran, and some modern writers, or you could say liberal writers if I can use that word, say it is an invention of modern Arabic to use a word that means blasphemy. It has, however, been used in early Islamic literature and in the hadith prophetic statements to mean deny, disacknowledge, be ungrateful, to be ungrateful of God's bounties and blessings, a bit like kafara. The Prophet Muhammad says in one tradition that tajdif is the worst of all sins. According to the 7th century Arabist Jacob Golius, teacher of Descartes, says blasphemy is meant here in this hadith, corresponding with the Hebrew root gadafa, also in the second form. But this may have come into Hebrew from Arabic, so it does not really get us anywhere. Now, I'm certainly not an expert on the Hebrew, and I probably made a mistake in my pronunciation as well, so please forgive me. But please do come in later if you can offer anything on this. Classical sources in the legal tradition use the word sab, mean to abuse or swear. So it will be swearing at God or swearing at the prophets. So swearing is different, because swearing in itself does not mean swearing at God or his messenger. It could be swearing at anybody. Now, because the Quran does not specify punishment, Muslim scholars have differed as to what punishment applies. The Hanafi schools, the largest of the 4 schools in Islam, and the law which has been used in almost every Islamic empire in history, equates blasphemy with apostasy. If a Muslim insults God or his messenger, he becomes a non-Muslim. And apostasy is potentially punishable by death, if it is a male. And also there are some other issues and conditions here, which we might go into later, but time is not really on our side. Some scholars mention how blasphemy comes under the verse of punishing those who spread fitna. That is, in other words, what is fitna? Is to instigate turmoil, strife, and civil unrest. In Muslim lands, if someone blasphemes against the Prophet, then you will see what I mean, and you've probably got an idea of that from some of the things that Dominique has said. Apostasy does not, however, come under the category of the had punishments for the Hanafis. So what are these had punishments? They are those acts that are considered rights of God, where God specifies the limits of lawful behavior, and these acts have fixed punishments if crossed. Although alcohol being one of them, there is some difference of opinion regards to what type of punishment should be applied in the consumption of alcohol. But the fact that it is a had punishment is clear. Now, because the blasphemer is taken outside the fold of Islam due to his or her act of blasphemy, a non-Muslim cannot be given the same punishment of blasphemy because he or she is already not a Muslim. So blasphemy against Islam does not change his or her state from believer to non-believer. The jurists state that blasphemy committed by a non-Muslim will not violate his or her protective status, the dhimma, where it is the responsibility of a Muslim government to protect the life and property of non-Muslim subjects. So, in that case, he cannot be killed. This, according to the Hanafis at least. Some sort of discretionary punishment, or called ta'zir, will be applied by a Muslim ruler to a non-Muslim for breaking the law of the land. Many jurists state that repentance is not sufficient in blasphemy, because blasphemy is a sin as well as a crime, and the crime must be punished. So for breaking the law, you will be punished. Some schools, such as the Shafi'i school in Islam, say that repentance is possible. Some schools treat the abuse of the Prophet more seriously than the abuse of God. And the reason is because they have abused the rights of man. and a man who is no longer alive to forgive and defend. A kind of restorative justice is not available. Do note that the other schools class apostasy as a had punishment, but they make a distinction between blasphemy and apostasy, at least in terms of how the sin is conceptualized. So the first important principle to take from my discussion is that the punishment of blasphemy cannot be applied to non-Muslims. The punishment of blasphemy should not be applied to non-Muslims, at least according to the larger school. And that can easily be adopted by others using certain legal principles where it allows you to borrow from other schools, and that has happened in history. And you can apply this to cases where in Europe or in the Muslim world, Muslims have been very angry about non-Muslims insulting the Prophet, for example, and in cases where punishments have been applied. Also, there needs to be an Islamic authority that has the power of execution, executive power, nifadh, and that is not present in non-Muslim lands. So there is no question of Islamic blasphemy laws being applied here in the West. So that's the second point, and it's a very important one, which many Muslims also miss. This leads on to the point that there is consensus among the four schools of Islamic jurisprudence that Muslims are not allowed to violate the laws of the land that they live in, and the contract, the ahad, they have when they enter a non-Muslim country in a peaceful state. And this contract, this covenant of security that they have, demands that they follow the laws of the land that they live in. So there is no question of applying Islamic laws of blasphemy to Muslims in non-Muslim lands, let alone to non-Muslims. These principles then assist Muslims to manage their religious beliefs and the dictates of their law in a non-Muslim secular society. In terms of Muslim countries, Muslim governments are also lacking that power of execution in many ways, as they are not accepted as rulers implementing Islamic law, but as secular laws who apply some Islamic law. So Muslim governments in the Muslim world are usually applying more secular laws than they are applying Islamic law. So why then is blasphemy law applied and not other Islamic laws? In some senses it's seen as a catch-all to represent Islamic law, the blasphemy law that is. The defining element by some Muslim countries to define that they are implementing Islamic law. And many Islamophobes, on the other hand, also see blasphemy as kind of the catch-all or the representative theme to represent the entire law of Islam. And you'll see that often in the media, and you will see that often sometimes expressed by popular politicians, that their characterization of Islamic law rests on laws of blasphemy. When they think about Islamic law, when they think what Sharia is, they will refer to the law of blasphemy. And I'll give one quick example, and I apologize to the translators because it's not on the script that I've handed to them. That when the Archbishop of Canterbury made the speech that about Sharia law and UK law, that some parts of the law it might be inevitable to incorporate them in civil law. The Sun newspaper, for example, said, the Archbishop calls for Sharia law to be implemented in the UK. So he says, an Islamic Sharia coming near you. This is what the headline says. What do they say now? Images of amputation, of beheading, coming to a court near you in England. This is kind of what I don't remember the exact, okay, we only have a little bit of time. So you can see how often blasphemy is used as a kind of catch-all among certain parts of the popular press, but it's also used among certain Islamic governments to legitimize themselves that they are implementing Islamic law. So Muslim governments also, in that sense, lack this power of execution. Why? Because there are so many other laws of Islam that they are not implementing, and Muslim scholars have raised this issue, that why only blasphemy law and why not laws, for example, prohibiting riba, interest, usury? Why is there not the focus? All Muslim countries, most of them are using usurious banking systems. What about issues of social justice? What about corruption? All these things that belong, or what Islamic law deals with and what are prohibited, yet they are being practiced fairly widely. So you can see here how the discussion of Islamic law and blasphemy is not a straightforward one, but it's quite a complicated one. But two things to mention in the Western context, because that's mainly what I want to deal with today, is that in a non-Muslim country, Islamic punishments of any kind cannot be implemented because there is not the executive power. There is not the wilaya, the word we use in Arabic Islamic sources. And secondly, if blasphemy is committed by a non-Muslim, even in a non-Muslim land, they are not to be subjected to Islamic penalties according to the opinion of most Muslim scholars. I have quite a bit to say on the modern context on blasphemy law, freedom of speech and liberty, but Jean has indicated that we are a bit short of time, so I will address that hopefully in the discussion session that we have. Thank you.